The topic for discussion today is about interim measures in foreign seated arbitration. So it's not just domestic arbitration. Now, for listeners who are not quite well versed in terms of the format of the Indian Arbitration Act, the Indian Arbitration Act is an act of 1996, and it was I wouldn't say a verbatim, but a primary adoption of the Percival model laws. Now, as we know, arbitration is divided into various chapters, but for most practitioners, I think what we discuss in common parlance is the term arbitrations under Part 1 of the Indian Arbitration Act and arbitration under Part 2 of the Indian Arbitration Act. And what we understand commonly is that Part 1 is usually referred to as domestic seated arbitration, whereas Part 2 relates to foreign arbitration. Now, a bit of clarification is required over here is that when we do refer to as foreign arbitration, or what we under the Act refer to as international commercial arbitrations, are two different things. Because foreign arbitrations or foreign seated arbitrations are arbitrations where the seat of arbitration is outside of India. Having the seat of arbitration outside of India does not per se make the arbitration an international commercial arbitration. What makes an arbitration an international commercial arbitration is what we know as a principle of nationality, which means if either of the parties to an arbitration have an element of being applicable to foreign law or foreign jurisprudence, say for example, a company being incorporated in a country outside of India, or an individual who's not a citizen of India, is one of the parties to the arbitration proceedings and is foreign in that essence, then that would result in it being an international commercial arbitration. Now, the idea is to not confuse you, but to make you understand that these are two distinct ideas and two distinct concepts, and it cannot be used interchangeably. And a lot of it flows from that as to why this distinction needs to be drawn. And in terms of international commercial arbitration, it becomes even more important is because when we specifically come to the topic of interim measures in international commercial arbitration, there is no separate provision for interim measures under Part 2 which deals with foreign arbitration. The only section or the only provision under the Indian Arbitration Act which deals with interim measures in arbitration, be it domestic or be it foreign seated, is Section 9 of the Indian Arbitration Act. Now, it would be important to discuss Section 9 as to how it has legislatively flown from its incorporation through various decisions of the courts, especially the Supreme Court, as well as the statutory amendments which have come in from time to time. So today's chapter is where I'll be discussing the first part being about how the Indian Arbitration Act, as it was accepted or as it was brought into our books of law, happens to be. That is the unamended Arbitration Act of 1996 and what it provided for in terms of interim measures. The second chapter of our discussion will be about the judgments of various courts, especially Supreme Court. The two primary judgments that we'll be referring to would be what most arbitration enthusiasts would know is the first judgment of the Supreme Court in Bhatia International versus Bulk Trading, and second, the judgment in Balco versus Kaiser Aluminium. These are the two judgments which we'll be discussing in detail. We'll follow this up with a discussion on the 2015 amendment to the Indian Arbitration Act, and then we will conclude the entire discussion with three judgments of Indian courts, especially Bombay High Court and Delhi High Court, as to how they have interpreted 2015. And then I will be providing a summation of what my view is based on my limited experience in all of this, in this entire subject, as to where we stand, having flown through almost 25 years of jurisprudential history. So starting off with the first chapter is about the Arbitration Act as it was incorporated. Section 9 of the Arbitration Act, as the unamended Arbitration Act, if I may call it so, provided for interim measures at three different stages. What were the three different stages? Is that first is that you can apply to a court of competent jurisdiction for interim reliefs prior to the arbitral tribunal being constituted. Second stage, subsequent to the arbitral tribunal is constituted, and while the arbitral tribunal is in session and has not passed the award. And third stage is after passing of the award, but before the award is enforced or executed in terms of Section 36 of the Indian Arbitration Act. So as you can understand that the original Arbitration Act as it stood unamended provided for courts to interfere at any stage of the arbitral proceedings. This, coupled with the fact that if you even right now look at the text of Section 9 and subsection 9(1)(e), which says that, and which is usually the discretionary relief which is given to the court, is that basically whatever the court may deem as a result of injustice to be met, and if I may quote it in exact verbatim, it would be such other interim measures of protection as may appear to be just and convenient. Now, people who have read up on the subject of not just arbitration, but even, say, interpretation of statutes will know that when the court is given the liberty to determine what is just and convenient, it is dependent on the facts of the case. It is dependent on the balance of convenience between the parties. And obviously, when I say balance of convenience, I do include three hallows of interim reliefs, which we have always followed, is that grave irreparable harm, balance of convenience of the parties. All of these things considered together, what happens is that that courts are given the power to interfere at any stage of the proceeding, and coupled with that, they are given wider powers to pass orders which they may feel just and convenient. So what was the end result and effect of this? The end result and effect of this was that we noticed during the initial stages of Arbitration Act coming into force is that parties would approach local courts or courts having jurisdiction for interim reliefs at any stage and every stage. And it would, in all essence, be a second court or an appellate court of relief, is that where parties would not succeed in getting an interim relief from an arbitral tribunal under Section 17, they would have a second shot at it by moving a Section 9 application in a local court. So this is where the initial hesitancy in India being an arbitral forum or a jurisdiction which is seen as a pro-arbitration jurisdiction started to come arise. And to further sort of, I wouldn't use the word compound the problems, but to further mystify it, came the judgment of the Supreme Court in Bhatia International versus bulk trading. Now, the judgment of Bhatia International came up about in 2002, and it came up in a very peculiar scenario, but a scenario which is nonetheless important for our discussion. And that scenario that I'm referring to is an international commercial arbitration. Now, Bhatia International was dealing with an arbitration, which I believe was an ICC arbitration, where the seat of arbitration was abroad. The award was made abroad. Now, the court was confounded with the issue that if a party is to approach for any interim reliefs, which would be the jurisdiction it would go to? Now, here I will pause for a moment and not go into the depth of Bhatia, because I think it's important for all the entire audience to understand and be able to distinguish what are the laws which are applicable to arbitration and which is the forum of jurisdiction for arbitral proceedings and court proceedings. Now, what are the laws which we generally apply to arbitration? There's a first law which is called as the governing law. Second is the substantive law governing the arbitration agreement. And third is what we call as the procedural law. Now, going a bit more into depth of what each of these laws deal with, is that first is the substantive law, which will apply to the subject matter of dispute. If I were to make it so, if party A was to initiate an arbitration with party B for damages for breach of contract, and if Indian law was the law which is applicable, then provision 73 and 74 of the Indian Contract Act will apply to determining what is the damages and the quantum of damages that could be awarded. This would in effect be the substantive law. Second comes in is the law governing the arbitration agreement, or if there is no separate standalone arbitration agreement, the arbitration clause. This will be necessary to understand that which is the court which will have jurisdiction for court proceedings. And when I say court proceedings, what are the proceedings I'm referring to? I'm referring to proceedings where a party moves an Indian court for interim reliefs, where a party has to move a particular court for getting an arbitral tribunal appointed or an arbitrator appointed, or a party has to move a local court to get assistance in recording evidence of a particular witness. Now, this is the law which will govern the which will govern the court proceedings in relation to the arbitration proceedings. So again, now I will demystify it with an example, is that assuming an arbitration is going on where the venue, now the venue and the seat is something that I'll come to is later, assuming the venue of arbitration is chosen as London, but parties have decided that the arbitration agreement will be governed by the laws of India. The effect of this would be that if for arbitration proceedings, they were to require the assistance of the court to record a witness statement, they would be mandatorily required to go to the Indian court and say, witness A resides in the city of Mumbai, and that is why I have approached this court to ask for your assistance for recording the witness statement of a particular witness. Now, coming to the last law, and which is the most important law on this entire thing, is the lex fori, or the law which determines the arbitration proceedings. This is purely the law which applies while the arbitration is in session. And what will this law say? This law will say the time limit for filing of a statement of claim or a statement of defense, how a witness statement is to be submitted, whether parties are required to examine or cross-examine a witness, whether arguments can be concluded only by merely filing written statements. This is what basically is the law governing the arbitration, or the third set of law that we refer to. And this could be, say, the ICC rules, the SIAC rules, the rules of, say, the Nani Palkhiwala Arbitration Center in India, the ICC sitting in Mumbai. Each of these tribunals or institutional tribunals have their own specific set of rules where they decide how an arbitration is to be conducted. And this is the third set of laws. Having having explained to you and probably clarified your doubt into what these three set of laws are, let us now look at the whole discussion of seat versus venue of arbitration. Now, seat versus venue of arbitration is rather, I would start this by saying that is, if you look at the scheme of the Indian Arbitration Act, you will not find a mention of the word seat, or will you find the mention of venue. Now, seat and venue are two different things. And it is very important for any person to investigate into the whole agreement and understand what is a seat and what is a venue of arbitration. Now, you can definitely use the words interchangeably, because there could be agreements where a seat is absent, but the venue is expressly stated. So there are judgments of the Supreme Court to say that where the seat is not been mentioned and a particular venue has been mentioned, we should consider the venue to be the seat of arbitration. Vice versa, the courts have also held that if a venue is specified, but the seat is not mentioned, then in all probability that venue is to be deemed as a seat of arbitration. And why is this a very important facet or an important preposition to understanding court proceedings under Arbitration Act? It is because arbitration, you will find a principle causes a principle of territoriality, or a principle of gravitational pull. Is to basically, if I have to summarize this in a very simple form, is to say that the seat of arbitration is the most important facet of any arbitral proceedings. Once a seat is determined, you know everything in the manner and how it is to be conducted. And I'll give you a very simple example of it. Is that, assuming under an agreement, Mumbai is determined as a seat of arbitration, which means for your section 9 for interim reliefs, your section 11 for appointment of arbitrator, your section 34 for challenging an arbitral award, everything will happen in Mumbai. If that is to be deemed to be the venue of arbitration, then even the arbitral tribunal shall conduct its sitting in Mumbai. But There could also be a scenario where parties say that, okay, Mumbai as a court is very quick in its dispensation of justice. So let us have our seat of arbitration in Mumbai. But because our arbitrators are all former judges of the Supreme Court, and each one of them is based in Delhi, let us have our venue of arbitration in Delhi. This is very much permissible. Because, friends, you have to understand one thing is that the core essence of arbitration is the freedom and the liberty of the parties to choose what they want to do and how they want to do in a particular manner and in a particular form. And if that particular manner and particular form is their intention to have the arbitration to be held at a particular place, then so be it. And that is what exactly has been accepted by the Supreme Court in a judgment, which I will discuss subsequently. But to basically summarize the entire discussion of seat and venue of arbitration, I would like you all to refer to this judgment at a later date after this webinar is over. Is the latest judgment of the Supreme Court which kind of settles the dust on this entire dispute. It is judgment of the Supreme Court in BGS SGS Soma JV versus NHPC Limited. Now, in this judgment, what Justice Nariman says is that the seat of the arbitration is one where the arbitral proceedings are to be continued. Now, what he says is, if I have to basically summarize it to you in one line, Justice Nariman says that if a seat is specified under the arbitration agreement or a venue is mentioned, that in all probability will be the seat of arbitration. But if the agreement is silent on the venue or on the seat, it does not mention anything, then you look to the governing law of the agreement and determine that to be the seat of arbitration. So again, to paraphrase this in a form of an example, if the arbitration agreement says that any and all disputes between the parties that arise hereunder shall be referred to arbitration, which will be governed by the laws of India, no mention of venue, no mention of seat. So Justice Nariman's, if one is to juxtapose Nariman's view into this judgment, what he basically means to say is that once you have mentioned the law of India will apply and your agreement is silent on the venue or the seat of arbitration, then by virtue of the fact that you have chosen governing law to be the law of India, India will be the seat of arbitration. So having attempted to clear this dispute or this difference or understanding between what is a venue and a seat of arbitration, let us come back to the judgment in Bhatia International. So what was the Supreme Court faced with in Bhatia International? The Supreme Court in Bhatia International was faced with a situation where a party approached the Indian court for interim reliefs in a foreign seated arbitration. And friends, this is a time when we had the whole situation of parties either being signatory to the Geneva Convention for Enforcement of Awards or the New York Convention for Enforcement of Awards. Now, what each of those conventions talk about and what is the difference and what's the benefit, that's a discussion for a different session altogether. But the question that was posed before Supreme Court at that point in time, and which weighed heavily on them, was that assuming a scenario where a party comes or a party is involved in an arbitration, where the seat of arbitration is either in a country which is a signatory to the New York Convention, or a country which is signatory to the Geneva Convention, or in a country which is not a signatory to either of the convention, then what is a party to do in such a situation? Which court will it go for seeking interim reliefs? Take an example. A party in India is litigating with a party in Singapore for an arbitration which is being held in Russia. Now, if the Singapore party is in all probability going to win the award in its favor or going to be the judgment debtor of this award, what is the interim measures which can adopt against the Indian party to ensure that while the arbitration proceedings are going on, this Indian party does not dissipate its assets, sell it away, and basically render the whole arbitration as infructuous because it does not have now the money to cough up or pay for its dues under the arbitration agreement. And especially with this question in mind, Justice Variava in Bhatia International felt that it would be wholly unjust for a party to not get the benefit of Section 9 regardless of where the arbitration is held. Whether held in India, then there is no question of Section 9 not applying. But you can definitely not argue to say that because Section 9 is in Part 1 of the Arbitration Act, which applies to domestic arbitration, you cannot apply it to Part 2 of arbitration, which deals with a foreign arbitration or a foreign seated arbitration. With this view in mind, and the other proposition, which is an important proposition, which subsequently gets negated, is that the Supreme Court holds that Section 9 is a provision of a general nature, which means it is a general provision which need not be replicated in each and every chapter. The fact that it's mentioned under Part 1 of the Arbitration Act means it is to be applied in Part 1 as well as Part 2 of the Indian Arbitration Act. And the most important discussion, and this is where the whole controversy starts, my friends, is that you have to refer to Section 2, subsection 2 of the Indian Arbitration Act. This section, you will find it in Part 1 of the Indian Arbitration Act. What does Section 2, subsection 2, Section 2, subsection 2 say? Section 2, subsection 2 of the Indian Arbitration Act says that this part shall apply to arbitrations held in India. Very simple language. Not much of ambiguity in this. But ambiguity usually creeps in by ingenuity developed or shown by lawyers. Now, the ingenuity that was shown in this section was, or in the interpretation of this section rather, was that it is understood that Part 1 is to apply for Indian Arbitration Act. The fact that this section is mentioned in Section 2, subsection 2 is only to make it a clarificatory part in nature to say that Part 1 will anyways apply to Indian Arbitration Act. But what is more important is that you have to look at Article 1, Sub-Article 2 of the model laws that we have adopted. What does Article 1, Sub-Article 2 say? Article 1, Sub-Article 2 says that the provisions of this law shall, except certain articles which I'll discuss later, shall only apply to an arbitration which is in a territory of the state. Now, not going back and forth again with these two sections, the most important part that is missing in our section, subsection 2, is the word only. And what is the effect of the word only? Is, for this, I will again read Article 1, Sub-Article 2. Article 1, Sub-Article 2 says that the provisions of this part, which means Part 1, shall apply. Next word is the most crucial word because it's the word only, which causes a lot of difference. Shall apply only if the place of arbitration is in a territory of the state, which means it says that Part 1 shall apply only if the place of arbitration is in a territory which has adopted this model bylaws. So now this word only is missing from the Indian Arbitration Act. But the Supreme Court says that since we have adopted the model laws, we have to read the word only. We cannot read in the word only, rather, sorry. And we have to understand that the fact that it is omitted means it was only for a clarificatory nature. When an arbitration is held in India, Part 1 cannot be derogated by any party. Part 1 will necessarily apply to the arbitration which is held in India. However, if an arbitration is to be held outside of India, then the parties can, by express agreement, not apply Part 1 to their arbitration proceedings held outside of India. Because again, coming back to the whole question that confounded the judges was, what is the remedy available to a party in a foreign seated arbitration? And the answer was nothing. Therefore, the court felt it was necessary that we have to make some provision for parties to get interim reliefs in foreign seated arbitration. So the conclusion in Bhatia was that Part 1 will apply to Indian arbitration. Part 1 will apply to foreign seated arbitration unless it is expressly excluded by the parties. Now, just to sort of like put the entire thing in a small box is, was the judgment in Bhatia International well intentioned? Yes, it was, because it provided for a remedy for a party is assuming, and we have to look at it in terms of the geopolitical context and the economic context at that point in time. Is India had just opened up its doors towards liberalization? Indian parties were getting into contracts with foreign parties. So assuming an Indian party, and this is probably what would have transpired in the minds of the judges at that point in time, is that if an Indian party is involved in a contractual dispute with a foreign party, and for execution for execution of its work order for its contract, it has provided, say, a bank guarantee or any other form of collateral security, would it be just and prudent for that party to then be required to approach, say, a court in London, merely because the principal contracting party is from the UK? That is where the court felt that it was necessary, probably to protect the interest of not just foreign parties, but as well as Indian parties in arbitration. So the judgment was definitely well intentioned, but the whole issue was that the law did not provide for the interpretation that the court had adopted. Now, what was the fallback of this judgment? The fallback of this judgment was that courts started applying Part 1 of the Indian Arbitration Act to all of its forms. And when I say to all of its forms, what do I mean by it? Is that the judgment of Bhatia International was very particularly under Section 9. It did not deal with Section 11. It did not definitely deal with Section 34. But because the headline of the judgment on Bhatia International was that Part 1 applies to foreign seated arbitration, the consequence of that was that parties then started approaching Indian courts under Section 11, under Section 34 for arbitrations which are foreign seated, and challenging foreign arbitration awards under Section 34 when there is a pari materia provision of Section 48 under Part 2 of the Indian Arbitration Act, which deals with challenge to foreign awards. And here it is important to refer to the judgment in Satyam Technology Services versus Global Ventures. Sorry, Venture Global versus Satyam Engineering. What was this judgment? This was a judgment which came post Bhatia, came in about 2008. And if I was to tell you in one simple line what this judgment said, that award passed by the London Chamber of International Arbitration could be challenged by a party under Section 34 of the Indian Arbitration Act, and a challenge under Section 34 of the Indian Arbitration Act shall not be considered as contrary to Section 48 of the Indian Arbitration Act, which provide for challenging of foreign awards. Now, friends, the whole thing which will go on in your mind is that how does it make a difference if you challenge a foreign award under Section 34 or under Section 48? For that, you will have to just look at the language of each of these sections, and it will be very clear to you that Section 34 provides for a much wider ambit for challenging of a foreign award. And that is why parties felt that if the grounds of challenge are so much more wider under Section 34, why not as well challenge our award under 34, because 48 provides for narrower grounds. And this is what led to the flurry of litigation that we are seeing right now, that we were seeing until that point in time, in terms of parties approaching local courts in India for foreign seated arbitrations under Section 9, under Section 11, under Section 34. Now, this again portrayed a picture that India was not a venue conducive for international commercial arbitration, and that is why parties were not forthcoming with having India either as a venue or as a seat of arbitration. So we fast forward to the judgment in 2012 of Balco Aluminium versus Kaiser Aluminium Technologies, which is Balco versus Kaiser Aluminium as commonly referred to. This was a constitutional bench of the Supreme Court which had the occasion of considering both the judgments in Bhatia International as well as Satyam Engineering. Now, just to pick up those key points that are discussed in Bhatia International, I will again put it to you as to how the court dealt with it in Balco International, Balco versus Kaiser Aluminium. With regards to Article 1, Sub-Article 2, the Supreme Court very clearly said that the use of the word only in Article 1, Sub-Article 2, if you remember, there was a use of the word only, That only was because Article 1, Sub-Article 2 said that only certain provisions of that chapter, that is Article 8, Article 9, Article 17, and Article 23, if I'm correct, will apply to arbitrations that are seated in the territory, which meant that apart from those articles were given extraterritorial jurisdiction. Our section subsection 2 made no such reference. Our section subsection 2 was very simple to say that this part shall apply to arbitrations held in India. And since there was no exception carved out, of course, if the court was of the view that if section subsection 2 read in this manner to say that this part shall apply except for section 9 to only arbitrations held in India, that would have had the effect of giving section 9 an extraterritorial jurisdiction, which meant that a party could then go and apply for a section 9 arbitration, a section 9 order, even if its arbitration is seated abroad. That was not the case when read section 2 subsection 2. Therefore, the court was of the view that the judiciary cannot put in words into the section that is not present or extract words that are not there in the act as such. Secondly, what the court held is that, and this is the most important thing, is because I keep on harping about the principle of territoriality and people having chosen a forum of court as to be the seat of arbitration. The primary driving point in Balco International was that if two parties out of their free consent and will have chosen a particular forum as their seat of arbitration, then they ought to be compelled to go to that court for seeking any release, whether that's interim release or whether that is release after passing of the award. Merely because it is, and this is where the court draws the essential distinction or a key distinction, is the court says that merely because one remedy is more onerous to you, that does not render you remediless. Because if you remember, that was exactly the thought which was behind the judgment in Bhatia International, where the court felt that for a party to go to a foreign jurisdiction to get an interim relief would leave it remediless. But in Balco, that position was dramatically changed, and the court felt that if you have chosen a seat of arbitration, you have chosen it with open eyes, you have considered your position, and having done which, and having adopted a jurisdiction out of your free will and consent, you cannot now say that this remedy is not beneficial for me, and that is why I will adopt a remedy which is not provided to me expressly under Part 2 of the Indian Arbitration Act. So, in summation, what did Balco International say? Balco International simply said that Part 1 of the Indian Arbitration Act will not apply to arbitration seated outside of India or foreign seated arbitration. So that clearly made the distinction that Part 1 of the Indian Arbitration Act only meant for domestic arbitration. Part 2 of the Indian Arbitration Act meant for only foreign seated arbitration. Now, now I will discuss the next jurisprudential development in this, which is the 246th Law Commission report. What did the 246th Law Commission report recommended? It took cognizance of the judgment of the Supreme Court in Balco, and what did it recommend? It recommended that in subsection 2, the word only should be put in after the words shall apply. So what did the amendment of 2015 as recommended by the 246 Law Commission report read as? That section 2 subsection 2 will read as, this part shall apply only to arbitrations held in India, basically bringing it in line with the Article 1 sub-Article 2 without any exclusion to any provisions, if I may say. But at the same point in time, the 246 Law Commission report again considered the view on Bhatia International and felt that it is necessary that a party in a foreign seated arbitration is provided some modicum of interim reliefs in India. And I will take the same example because that is the exact example that is taken in the Law Commission report, is that if an arbitration is held outside of India, then certain interim reliefs or interim measures shall be given to the parties to ensure that the assets are preserved while the arbitration is pending. So basically, what the 246 Law Commission tried to do is balance the two judgments of the Supreme Court by putting in the word only in section 2, subsection 2. What it wanted to do was bring that section in line with Balco versus Kaiser Aluminium, to say that this part will only apply to arbitrations held in India, which is part 1 will only apply to domestic seated arbitration. But at the same point in time, it tried to bring back Bhatia International by adding a proviso. And what is the proviso that they recommended? They recommended a proviso which read as follows: provided that, subject to an express agreement to the contrary, the provisions of section 9, 27 and 37 shall apply to international commercial arbitrations even if the seat of arbitration is outside of India. So what was the effect of this proviso? Recommended, and let me use the word recommended because there's an important thing which flows subsequently. The 246 Law Commission recommended that you shall use the word express agreement to the contrary. And we all know as students of law, what does the word express agreement mean? It means an agreement cannot be verbal. You cannot have it agreed by consent. It has to be expressly worded and it has to be in clear terms. So unless you have an express agreement to the contrary, section 9, 27 and 37 will apply to even foreign seated arbitration. Having made this recommendation, let us now look at what the 2015 amendment did. The 2015 amendment accepted the recommendations of the Law Commission report, but instead of the use of the words and by an express agreement to the contrary, the legislature adopted a words and agreement to the contrary. Now, again, as students of law and avid readers of various judgments, we all know that when it's an agreement to the contrary, as against an express agreement to the contrary, it leaves that entire scope for judicial interpretation and interpretation in terms of reading of the terms of the contract. Because what is an express agreement to the contrary is very clearly understood. But what is merely an agreement to the contrary is not understood. It could be by the wording of the agreement, it could be by the conduct of the parties, and there could be many other facets in which I may have agreed to the contrary that I do not want to apply part 1 of the Indian Arbitration Act to my arbitration. And on the basis of this, let me now come to the penultimate discussion of 3 judgments of our courts which have dealt with this 2015 amendment. The first and the foremost judgment that came about on this subject is the judgment of the Supreme Court in Raffles Design India versus Educom Professional. Now, friends, the peculiarity of these 3 judgments, and to my mind, these are the only 3 judgments that have come forth. Is there any other judgments on this subject? I would love to know about them. So the peculiarity that I was coming back to in these 3 judgments is that all 3 judgments are based on a post-arbitral award scenario. It did not deal with a scenario prior to the arbitration being commenced. Because, friends, as you know now, after the 2015 amendment, it is no longer open to parties unless circumstances exist to approach a court under Section 9 when the arbitral tribunal is in session. Which means basically the arbitral tribunal has been given vast powers to give almost all and every orders or interim orders that are necessary. It's only very few of those orders which an arbitral tribunal cannot pass, is in which scenario you will have to go to a court under Section 9 and apply. So coming back to the judgment of the Supreme Court of the Delhi High Court in Raffles Design. Now Raffles Design, as I said, is a post-arbitration award. Post-arbitration award Section 9 proceeding. It was an arbitration held in Singapore, which means the seat of arbitration. And let me clearly use the words, my friend, because I've read the arbitration clause under the agreement, is it refers to the word seat. So Singapore is chosen as the seat of arbitration. SIAC are the rules, that is the Singapore International Arbitration Center, is the rules which governs the arbitral proceedings, and the laws which are applied will be the laws of Singapore. All three things bear Singapore as its identity, the law and the venue as well. So what happens? ICIC passes an award. One of the parties approaches the Delhi High Court asking for certain interim measures, basically to not ask them to salvage their assets while we are in the midst of our execution proceedings. And what does the Delhi High Court peculiarly hold over here? Is that the Delhi High Court goes on two grounds. And the most important ground, one is the applicability under Section 26. That is the whole judgment of BCCI versus Kochi International and so on and so forth, which is now much more settled by virtue of the latest amendment which has come into the Arbitration Act in 2019. So I will not go into the first aspect, but the second most aspect is very important, because that is the one which bears reference to our entire discussion today. The second issue which weighed upon the Delhi High Court was that, or the consideration which Delhi High Court gave predominance to, was that the Delhi High Court looked at the SIC rules. Article 26(3) of the SIC rules basically in simpler terms says that it shall not be incompatible for a party to go and approach a civil court and get interim release. This, coupled with the fact that the parties had not expressly excluded Indian law, the Delhi High Court viewed that because the SIC rules allows for us, or allows for parties to approach civil courts for interim relief, if the SIC rules permitted for a party to approach civil courts for interim reliefs, it would be open, and this is the exact term, it would be open for the parties to approach civil courts in any jurisdiction for getting interim reliefs. And my friends, this has a very wide implication, is because in my humble view, and obviously the judges who have passed this opinion are much more well versed on the subject, I feel that this is a judgment which I will come to later subsequently. There is a judgment of the Supreme Court on this point, which I'll discuss right at the end, is reference to laws which govern the arbitral proceedings cannot be taken cognizance to while determining applicability of Section 9 or not. To say that once the parties had chosen Singapore law as the substantive law of the agreement, the court was duty bound to look at Singapore law or the Singapore Arbitration Act, and then to see whether that act provided for a party to approach another court which is not a Singapore court for receiving interim reliefs, or getting interim reliefs rather. It cannot be at any point accepted that a party or a court should look at the laws governing the arbitral proceedings to determine whether a court in India or in any other jurisdiction is a competent court of jurisdiction. Because my friends, as you all will know, in the Kochi BCCI versus Kochi judgment, the court made a clear distinction between arbitral proceedings and court proceedings. Section 9, 11 and 34 are essentially court proceedings. So a law which governs arbitral proceedings cannot be replaced to determine court proceedings. Court proceedings, in my humble opinion, will clearly be based on the law which is governing the agreement, or the substantive law of the agreement, which in this case would have been the Singapore law. The second judgment which came about on this subject is the judgment of the Bombay High Court in Aircon Baibar Revseri versus Heligo Charters Private Limited. Again, a post-arbitration award proceedings under Section 9, again an SIC rules, again a law which is Singapore laws. And what does the Bombay High Court hold? The Bombay High Court takes a much more stronger stance on this subject to say that mere choosing of the Singapore law will not be an agreement to the contrary. Your agreement to the contrary will have to be express, which means merely adopting Singapore laws will not outside the jurisdiction of Indian laws or outside the jurisdiction of Section 9. Coupled with your Singapore law your agreement has to specifically state that, like I will have to word this agreement for that case, is that in this case, the laws of Singapore will apply. However, the parties hereby expressly agree that Part 1 of the Indian Arbitration Act shall not apply to this arbitration proceedings. In terms, this is what the Bombay High Court expected the arbitration clause to have to exclude the jurisdiction of Indian courts, which is again inconceivable, my friends, is for a simple reason that agreements are not which is negotiated on a day in, day out basis. Agreements are negotiated probably 15 years down the line, and then supplementary agreements are executed as and when required. And as I've discussed with you, our jurisprudence on this subject has changed from the inception of the Act in 96 to judgments of Bhatia in 2002 to the judgment of Kaiser Aluminium and Balco in 2012, the amendment in 2015, and now the judgments of High Courts in 2018 and 19. So, could it be conceivable for parties to envisage such a scenario and put in a clause under the agreement in excluding Indian laws in such clear-cut terms? And there, the court took another view to say that, well, look at the proviso which is brought in Section 2, subsection 2. This proviso was brought in expressly to provide for the applicability of Section 9 to foreign seated arbitration. So when the section has such a specific intent of being there, why should it not be that the exclusion of such a section be also in that express nature? And this was a similar judgment, this was a similar point of view, which is thereafter followed by the Bombay High Court in another judgment in Tramco DMCC versus Nagarjuna Fertilizers, where it said that again you have to look at Section 2 too. You have to look at the fact that it's not expressly excluded, and that is why they held that the Indian laws will apply. Now, friends, again, the motive in this seems to be great, because once a party has gotten aboard after a long and an arduous arbitration proceedings, it should not be a scenario where we come to the position of a party then having to execute an award and not having assets to attach or secure its decretal amount. So the intent was always right. But again, we have seen in the past is that once a judicial pronouncement is given, it does not prevent a party from expanding it and applying it to other case scenarios. Which means, although in this scenario, Section 9 was applied only to post-award proceedings, it will not be inconceivable to simply say that, okay, even in this agreement, you have agreed to the laws of UK, but you have not expressly excluded the Indian laws. So now, before the arbitration proceedings have commenced, I will make an application under Section 9 and make any and all attempts to stall the arbitration proceedings. And like I mentioned to you while discussing Raffles design, this issue has been very succinctly described by Justice Nariman in another judgment of Reliance Industries versus Union of India. And there, it will be important for me to read the paragraph as it is mentioned in the judgment. And this is paragraph 17 of the judgment, where Justice Nariman holds that it is important to note in paragraph 32 of Bhatia International itself, this court had held that Part 1 of the Arbitration Act will not apply if it is excluded either expressly or by necessary implications. Several judgments of this court have held Part 1 is excluded by necessary implication if it is found on the facts of the case that either the juridical seat of arbitration is outside of India, or the law governing the arbitration agreement is a law other than Indian law. So, friends, it's very clear by the judgment of the Supreme Court in Reliance Industries versus Union of India, where Justice Nariman says that necessary implication is enough if the jurisdictional seat or the seat of arbitration is outside of India, or the parties have chosen the governing law to be law other than the law of India. And if this principle was to be applied in all three judgments, that is the judgment of the Delhi High Court in Raffles Design, the judgment of the Bombay High Court in Heligo Barbars, and the subsequent judgment in DMCC Tramco versus Nagarjuna Fertilizers, all these three judgments would be held as per and current because of this express view taken by the Supreme Court in Reliance Industries. So now coming to the conclusion, where do we stand as such coming to 2020, and why it's important to discuss this today in the current scenario is all of us follow various legal journals, we follow legal websites, and we have been seeing a spurt of litigation in international commercial arbitration because of the fact that in the current pandemic scenario, trade has stopped, people have given bank guarantees, money is not flowing through, credit cycles have stopped. So we have definitely seen a larger spurt of litigations prior to arbitrations, because we have seen that Section 9 is rather used as a more effective pressurizing tool instead of going in for arbitration proceedings. So in this scenario, it was necessary to discuss what is the applicability of Section 9 for an international commercial arbitration. So having discussed which, what do I think in my limited experience that should be the position going forward? And we really don't have to look much further off. What we need to look forward to is giving the orders passed by an arbitral tribunal under Section 17 the status of an order of a court. And why do I say that we don't need to look any further away? Is that we have to simply look at Article 17H of the model bylaws. Article 17H of the model bylaws is very clear, where it basically says that an interim measure of an arbitral tribunal shall be recognized and binding and shall be enforced as an order of a civil court. And I think if this is done coupled with allowing arbitral tribunals much more wider powers, I think we can in all essence understand that Section 9 will be only left for those very extraordinary measures where an arbitral tribunal cannot pass such an award. To put it again in a scenario of an example is that even if an arbitration is being held in London and the LCIA arbitral tribunal passes an interim order, that order should be brought to India and enforced as an executable order, and the grounds for challenging an award could be kept as stringent as the grounds for challenging an arbitral award under Section 34. So with that discussion, I think I've broadly discussed what has been the scenario in terms of interim measures in foreign ceded arbitration. I have discussed with you how the jurisprudence in this has evolved, and I have discussed also with you the current scenario in light of the 3 judgments of the various courts in India. And with that, I conclude my session. Thank you for your patient hearing, guys.
So the first question raised by Shaman Satya is, can 2 Indian parties contracting in India agree to govern their arbitration and contract by law of another country despite the contract being performed in India?
So that is where the neutrality principle comes in and the freedom of choice comes in an arbitration act. Is that now there are judgments. I think there's a judgment of Justice Dhanuka and Milton Industries on this point, is to say that what is the nationality of the award. But this is again the pre-amendment scenario. First, I'll answer your question. Yes, it is possible because the parties are entitled to contract out of Indian laws, but necessary provisions of Indian laws are still considered to be applicable. Like to say that you might have chosen Singapore laws as the laws governing arbitration, but assuming there are offenses, say under the PMLA Act or any other form of, say, money extortion or so on and so forth, or any other laws which are non-derogable laws, then merely by contracting out of Indian laws, you cannot say that these laws will not apply to us. But yes, to answer your questions, it is very much possible for a party to contract out of Indian laws. But non-derogable provisions will still apply.
Sure. Oh, the second question is, for 2 Indians choosing a foreign seat, say London, does it mean there would be no applicability of Indian Arbitration Act 1996 in that arbitration?
Well, now in terms of the proviso which has been inserted to Section 2, subsection 2, is that unless that agreement which has provided for an arbitration in London expressly ignores or like expressly states that Indian Arbitration Act or Indian laws will not apply, unfortunately, Section 9, Section 34, Section 9, Section 27 and 28 will still apply to Arbitration Act. But again, my interpretation on the basis of Reliance Industries versus Union of India is that it should not apply. And well, we hope that there is some clarity on this aspect going forward. But in the current scenario, and considering the latest orders which have been passed by the high courts on international commercial arbitration, in view of the current pandemic, it seems that they are still applying Section 9 for foreign ceded arbitrations as well.
Okay. The last question is, in view of Amendment 42A, confidentiality clause is introduced in Arbitration Act. How does this impact challenging award in Indian courts when pleadings are confidential in nature? Can the pleadings be filed in applications challenging the award?
Well, the principle of confidentiality comes in terms of the arbitral proceedings. Like I clarified before, is that we have to understand that not everything under the Arbitration Act is considered as arbitral proceedings. Certain proceedings, say under proceeding Section 9, 11, 34, which I mentioned before, are considered as court proceedings. So at least in terms of, say, confidentiality, those are principles which govern the arbitral tribunal and would not, per se, apply to the court. And much less pleadings as such are not which are looked into while a court is dealing with a challenge to an award under Section 34. Because if we read the language of Section 34, or we look at the language of Section 48, which deals with international commercial arbitration, the language is very clear to say that it is only looking into the award, or it is only examining the award on very limited grounds. And we have line of those judgments to say that reappreciation of evidence or a relook at the pleadings or the issues framed by the arbitral tribunal will not be a subject matter of 34 proceedings. So honestly, I don't see much of an issue in terms of confidentiality when it comes to international commercial arbitration or in terms of challenging an award under Section 34.